Hello, I'm TJ and welcome to my garden. Listen along as we explore the art and science of gardening. You can leave feedback for the show at 661-368-5177 or visit our website at tjsgarden.com. Hello and welcome to week 46. This week I'm going to do a book review. I did want to talk a little bit about a few other things before I got into that, though. So, last week I kind of squeezed out a quick episode. This episode isn't going to be very long either, but I am kind of working on trying to do the show more consistently in the following year. That's kind of my New Year's resolution. So I'm going to put out several episodes this month and next month, hopefully still keeping to something close to weekly. I'm trying to make Tuesday my release day. Hopefully that works going forward. And next year, I'm going to work on developing, an editorial calendar, all the big fancy things to get the show to be a little more cohesive and reliable. So I'm not always sort of scrounging for new ideas like every week. I literally record the show the week I release it. And I would like to be able to get a little bit of a buffer going. I've never been very good at that, but that's my New Year's resolution, to become a more proficient podcaster. And I think the big part of it is I want to share gardening with people. It's something I enjoy. I really do like helping people learn to garden. I don't know if my current career path is necessarily how I'm going to be doing that long term, but this podcast is definitely part of how I'm going to be doing it long term. And I want to make that as good as I can. And then I also just want to help break the science down for people. Get people to understand why the things in their gardens, why the plants work the way they do, why the insects work the way they do, the chemistry, when to use what to take care of things. Kind of share some integrated pest management stuff, a little bit of tips, some hacks, some different ways of gardening, some different artistic things as well. Just generally really delivering on my tagline, the art and science of gardening. I want it to be very approachable to new gardeners, experienced gardeners, as well as people who do work maybe in garden education. I want people to be able to improve their knowledge here and share that knowledge with kids, help start community gardens, help get people gardening. That's my goal, really, is to make gardening approachable, get people into it, get people who are maybe sitting around on the fence thinking, I want to try gardening, to garden. I think the shows I've done so far are in that vein, so I'm not planning on taking anything down. The interviews I've done have been with people who have taken something sometimes very complex or maybe hard to approach and just gone out there and done it, regardless of their existing skill level. And I think that's very encouraging for people who may want to try new things. You want to try bonsai? I want to interview people who started from zero and became bonsai masters. And I want to read bonsai books for you guys and give you some tips and hints and distill the ideas. I want to talk about the methods, right? When it comes to tissue culture, like the interview I did with Sebastian, I want to really get into that. The show is still going to be primarily me. It's going to be mostly a solo show with occasional interviews peppered in here and there when I can get decent ones, like the ones I've had so far. I really appreciate everybody I've interviewed, by the way. But yeah, I want to break down any barriers you feel. I want you to have no excuse to make whatever gardening you want to do happen. Whether it's growing some vegetables for your family, whether it's growing potted plants, and house plants, very popular right now, obviously, bonsai, different, horticultural arts like that, getting into tissue culture, cell culture, maybe even a little bit of genetic engineering, depending upon how some of the sort of community access projects like the one Sebastian was talking about himself happen. Breeding projects like what Craig LaHillier was talking about, those are completely uncontroversial and anybody can do them in their own backyard. Trivial. You can get some plants and start one right now. It's not hard. I actually want to talk to somebody involved with fast plants on the show at some point. I don't know if I'll be able to pin somebody down. If not, though, I'll just talk about fast plants at some point too, because they're kind of fascinating. It's a great way to experiment with breeding because they grow really fast. But anyway, that's the broad strokes of what I'm going to be focusing on for the foreseeable future, what I want this show to be. And I may introduce some little side projects that feed into that, like classes you can take or other things. I know it's very popular to do stuff like that through Skillshare or through webinars or things like that. I'm still kind of investigating that, but I do definitely want to have some additional learning if you're interested. You know, the show will still be a podcast. It will be free. You will put it on your podcatcher. It will download it. You can listen to me. But if you want that additional stuff, if you want me to go through things with you, have the sort of feedback back and forth, that will be a thing I will be offering at some point, I'm sure. You can, of course, always reach out to me if you just have questions through the phone number at the beginning of the show there, or you can go to the contact page on the website. Kind of like a college professor, my office hours are always the quietest time of my life, namely that I don't get a lot of feedback. So if you ask me a question, it's very likely to get answered on the show because I don't get a lot of questions yet. If at some point in the future I do, that might change, but for now, ask away, especially if you do work in a community garden, a school garden, any kind of weird gardening situation like that, and you want a little help, I'm more than happy to help. Just ask. Okay, so on to the main meat of the show, the main book. I'm going to review Backyard Market Gardening, The Entrepreneur's Guide to Selling What You Grow by Andy Lee and Patricia Foreman, with a foreword by Jim Hightower, introduced and edited by George DeVault. And then on the back, Money Grows in Your Garden. Here's the classic flagship book that helped establish farmers markets worldwide. Discover how easy and profitable it is to grow and sell vegetables, fruits, flowers, herbs, and small livestock from your own backyard market garden. Learn how others grow and sell 14,000 pounds of food on less than 1/8 acre, Ohio. $150,000 from 1/2 acre to fancy restaurants, California. $40,000 from 1 acre of Oriental raised beds, Oregon. $36,000 from 3/4 of an acre to city farmers markets, Massachusetts. Learn how you can earn top dollar with minimum effort and maximum profits. Grow high value crops in small spaces efficiently and quickly. Create markets that are profitable, reliable, fun, and sustainable. Grow high value crops in small spaces efficiently and quickly. Buy or build tools that will speed your work and increase profits. And let's see. Find your market niche in membership gardening, community-supported agriculture, farmers markets, card table in your front yard, farm stands, clientele, membership, club, producer cooperatives, restaurants, caterers, institutions. Pick your own and even growing specialty crops for your neighbor's salsa recipe. Backyard Market Gardening is the book that shows you how to do what you can with what you have where you are. George DeVault, Organic Gardening Magazine. Market gardening, as described by Andy Lee, is very rewarding to the soul, the soil, the environment, and the flow of capital. Jim Hightower, Austin, Texas. The farmer of the future will be a gardener. Backyard Market Gardening is their working guide. Gene Logston, author and organic farmer. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Backyard Market Gardening is written by a master farmer who has walked his talk. Will Happ, President, Gardener Supply Company. So, normally when I do my when I do my reviews, I read off the table of contents to give you some ideas. Unfortunately, this one doesn't really have... the contents don't have or the table contents. The chapters don't have titles, but broadly speaking, the first chapter covers things like soil, composting, situating a garden, that sort of thing. The second one covers tools and equipment, things you can buy, build, whether or not you need certain things, how to decide, figuring out what your conditions are and what you need to adjust those conditions. Chapter 4 goes into marketing, business ideas, covers how these things are organized. It gives you a bunch of examples of different farmers and how they set up their farms. Talks about farmers market. Talks about the problem with sweet corn, which is that it's a section called "Sweet Corn Sure Is Popular." All these are actually they're little sections individually with a title, so they're grouped in chapters roughly by content, but the individual sections have their own titles. So you have subscription marketing summary and card table in the front yard, which will for instance, a card table in your front yard talks about just setting up a card table in your front yard and selling produce out of there, and what the kind of benefits are, what isn't. The hand-picked sweet corn part, if I can get to that part real quick, because I think I'm near that. I am not. But anyway, the chapters break all that down. Then you have, let's see, I think it's chapter 5 goes into, let's see, kind of different ways that they sell and advertise to customers. 6 is kind of business organization. 7 goes into some of the benefits of being small, ways to sort of find a niche. It also talks a little bit about whether or not you should do raised beds, things like that. This is where I'm saying like the organization kind of breaks down, because that probably should have been in the same section as other equipment parts or something like that. It does have a plans for a homemade greenhouse you can build. And yeah, it's basically, it has tunnels, everything else, so a little bit of season extension, stuff like that in there as well. Chapter 8 talks about pest control. That one is very topical. It's just one big section with weed and pest control and disease control. Chapter 9 is him sort of stepping aside for a little bit. I say him. I think 9 is written by Andy Lee. And that one is him sort of laying out that basically his feelings about how agriculture can kind of grow to be more local and small, how you could have a lot more smaller local farms doing kind of market gardening essentially for your day-to-day. A lot of your day-to-day produce and the big staples and stuff could still be grown by larger farms. I'm probably not giving exactly what he's saying, but basically that's kind of how he lays it out, and the environmental cause, why he thinks this is good for the environment, that sort of thing. Then 10 goes into a lot more of sort of the environmental side of it. He goes over mulches again for some reason. Then he has the afterword and the appendixes, which have all the suppliers, everything else like that. So content-wise, this book had a lot of good stuff. In truth, I sat down and read the whole thing cover to cover. I don't feel like a lot of people are going to do that or going to want to do that. I think you're going to go through and find the headings that interest you and read those first, and then gradually read through the rest of it as you go. And you can totally do that. Each section is somewhat standalone. So when you read, for instance, let me flip to one here. Buy Now, Pay Later, Codman Community Farm in Lincoln, Massachusetts. That just talks about Codman Community Farm. There is nothing that references anything else. You can just read that section and you're good to go. So if there's just specific answers about market gardening you want, you can kind of pick and choose, provided the headings match the question in your head. I don't like the organization overall. I don't hate it because the sections are somewhat standalone, so it's okay. It's more like you're reading a collection of essays or short blog articles that were all compiled into a big, thick book. So it's a lot of content in little chunks, which is good. You know, it's good. Made it very easy for me to read through, because I could read a little bit on my lunch hour, read a little bit when I got home, read a little bit before, like when my daughter takes a nap before she wakes up. It's very convenient to read. So I do like that. But organizationally, there isn't like one chapter that has everything about tools, and one chapter that has everything about dealing with soil issues, and one chapter that has everything about pest control, one chapter that is just marketing. It gets closer to that with the marketing and business side. But when it comes to gardening stuff and the market gardening tips, that's spread throughout the book. Largely, though, I don't know that that's a big problem, because this book is targeted at gardeners. It's not meant to be picked up by somebody who knows absolutely nothing about gardening and used as a primer for everything. This is for somebody who's done some growing in their own backyard, maybe grown their own vegetables, that sort of thing, who wants to scale up and start a small business with that. This is about making a side income, possibly your primary income, probably just a side income though, from your gardening, right? If you have a decent sized yard, or maybe access to a plot or access to some other land, and you want to set up some beds and start really intensively growing fruits and vegetables, this is a good book for that. This walks you through how to plan your business model, things like that. It doesn't get into a lot of specifics as far as the legal requirements for these kinds of businesses, which is a bit of a problem. I wish they'd maybe had a chapter where they had the similar sectional layout like it is in the rest of the book, but each section covered a given state's laws and common laws in that region at least, right? So like you could turn to the California one and see what kind of growers permits and everything else you need to sell at most of the farmers markets here. I get they couldn't do every single area. That would be a whole book in itself, and that could be a very useful book actually. Not so much to own yourself, but a good reference book for libraries to have. But I feel like something at least that covered the gist would have been very handy, and that isn't really covered very well in here. It's just sort of like a lot of these things, it just says check with your local state government. And of course, when you check with your local state government, it can be kind of tedious. Here, to do a lot of to grow plants to sell in a nursery situation, which is something I'm actually kind of interested in doing. You can get a permit that covers like under $1,000 a year, I think. That's trivial to get and cheap. And then there's a actual grower's permit that's a little harder, but even that's not really tedious. It just costs a little more. My problem is I don't own the land I live on. I'm living with family and they rent. So this yard is not mine. It's not even theirs. So I have an area where I could grow, and I don't think my landlord would have a problem. It's just getting all the paperwork sorted out and getting him to sign it. And that's where I'm running into problems. May do it anyway, because I'm still very interested in growing. But when it comes to growing for food, there are some other issues having to do with food safety, things like that. You also can get into some really complicated laws as far as what you're allowed to encompass in the same business, right? We have a lot of weird laws like that, both in the U.S. but also abroad. I know Canada has some areas where it's a little weird too. But basically what they want to do is keep certain kinds of businesses from being merged together because they've seen problems with them in the past. The problem is they don't provide any pathway to do it correctly in a lot of cases. So you'll run into a situation. An example, it's not pertinent to gardening or agriculture, but it's kind of the same idea, is the 3-tier system we have for alcohol, which was set up way back when. It was sort of to placate kind of criminal elements, kind of, as far as the distribution of alcohol. So we broke it all up into this 3-tier system, and there are a lot of business reasons why people fight for that 3-tier, even though it gets in the way of setting up a gastropub, companies that vertically integrate and they brew and distribute their own beer, things like it makes it very hard for them to get stuff like that out there. And there are similar things with agriculture where in some areas you can't do a farm to table restaurant, right? It's very hard in a lot of areas to open up a business where you grow your food on the farm and you serve it right there on the farm. A lot of times the farm, the restaurant, everything else, they have to be completely separate businesses because they don't want you just picking right out of the ground, giving a quick rinse and throwing it right on the table. They want the whole process because they've ensured that the process, like all the laws are in place for you to sell food, and then all the laws are in place for restaurants to buy and make meals, and they haven't figured out a good way to bridge that gap. So instead of leaving some leeway and having some way for people to do that, they just say no because it's safer. It's path of least resistance for them. So unfortunately, that is not in this book. There is no easy guide to laws, no saying, say, in Texas, you can't have this kind of business with this, or you have to get these permits to sell at a farmer's market. It doesn't go into a lot of detail with that. That would have been a little more useful. That also would have become dated very quick as laws change, so I get why it's not in here, but it would have been good for them to at least have some solid references for that for you to go to, just to get you there. I feel like if this is supposed to be the one book, one-stop shop for market gardening, you need then to be able to be pointed at how to figure out the laws easily to make this happen. In some areas, it's not a big deal. I live in California where things like that tend to be a big deal. And I know in some states in the Midwest and that there's all these kind of laws that kind of let you do it all under cottage laws if it's under certain amounts. And even if it's not, you can, get trivial licensing to do it, provided you just show, basic sanitation. So it may not be as big a deal in your state as it is in mine. But I do feel like that was a little lacking in here. But everything else, the tools, the tips, how to run a garden like that, how to sort of plan things out, think about how much your seed costs you, how much seeds cost you, doing your budgets, whether or not you need to hire labor, whether or not you need to get a tractor depending upon your size, what other equipment you can use to substitute for the equipment larger farms use when you're too small to really practically justify that equipment. A lot of that's in here. And it's very well laid out. It also does talk a little bit about raised beds and why, in a lot of situations, you really don't need them, especially not for a market garden where it's a commercial enterprise. So there's no reason to make it ergonomic or ornamental. This is just business. So it does go into that a little bit and break that down as well. And this is written by people who have successfully run market gardens. So they do know what they're talking about. And you do get that impression as you're reading through the book. So I enjoyed this book. The version I have is the 11th printing. I believe it came out, I want to say in 2003. Let me double check. 2007, sorry. And the original copyright was 1993. I don't know if there is an updated version right now. I couldn't find one when I did my quick search a little bit ago. I didn't get a chance to look one up today, so maybe I will post a link to whatever's currently on Amazon. Hopefully that is a revised printing with updated resources in the back, because this does have resources like seed companies, bulk seed companies where you can get a lot of seed, equipment companies, things like that. And I don't know how dated these references are, how many of these businesses are still operating. Like if you go under suppliers, A.M. Leonard's still around. Market Farm Implement in Friedens, Pennsylvania. I don't know if they're still there or not. They're a smaller outfit. A.M. Leonard is everywhere. Country Home Products, Crop King Inc. So some of these are definitely. Gardener's Supply is obviously there. Johnny Seed. Just kind of skimming through them real quick to see. Yeah, a few of these may or may not still be there. A lot of them seem like they probably would be, so it may not be that big a deal to get an older one like I did. It does have book publishers and stuff where you can hunt down other gardening books, as well as a reference section for books he referenced, or they referenced, rather. I keep saying he, and this was a partnership, so I don't know where Andy ended and Patricia began, but he and she, sorry. If I say he again, I apologize to Patricia. She probably contributed every bit as much to this book as he did, and deserves just as much accolade, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, I'll try and say she a few more times instead of he to balance it, maybe. We'll go with that. But they've got like an appendix on the Intervale Foundation, which just talks about, I believe this is the one that Andrew Lee, this is the one Andy Lee runs. And it talks about, they basically teach like small scale farming, stuff like that. Talks about the, this is one, the integrated garden system. Okay, so the integrated farming method, which is largely in that last chapter about sort of environmentalism, stuff like that, ties in with eco farming, and it's basically, it's his, but it's mostly taken from some of the other Rodell publications about organic farming and things like that. It's basically a raised bed farming method, focused around using a lot of high-end compost, intensively planting in the beds. It borrows a lot from the so-called French intensive method. I say so-called because when people have gone back to look for it, you don't find French growers growing in this way. A lot of them grow in greenhouses and more modern methodologies. But basically, it's focused around deep raised beds, lots of compost and mulch, and so you're recycling all those garden waste products from growing, and a little bit of rotation. But you're basically breaking the garden up into like thirds or whatever, and different types of crops in different thirds, and then you rotate them around. So you're doing, it's kind of broader than traditional rotation. And you're growing livestock and other things right there on the farm. So it's basically the model that a lot of people are kind of pushing towards lately, that rolls things back to the more diversified farms we used to have. It's essentially trying to reverse monocultures, because in a diversified farm, you have the animals producing compost, which you can use to grow the crops. And some of that stuff are, some manure and other products are also being diverted to grow more feed and fodder for the livestock. So it all cycles around. There are advantages and disadvantages. The main disadvantage of that kind of a system is that you can't produce things in bulk. You're right. The scale at which we can produce sweet corn, for instance, is staggering. And you can't do that in a diversified farm. It's just not how it's designed to work. We don't need bulk of a lot of things, though. So I think smaller diversified farms like that actually do make a lot of sense for a lot of our products. If we could have a a bunch of those embedded in and around us in every community, and we're all getting most of our stuff from these smaller farms, and then we're getting the big bulk items and industrial items from the larger farms. That would make a lot more sense, because everything would be traveling less, more people would be involved. Big problem nowadays is we have a lot of idle people who could be running little farms and having a nice little life, and instead they're sitting around unemployed and stressed out and worried. If we could build a system like this, that could engage a lot more people and be very fruitful. So there's a lot of interesting. He doesn't go into that so much, but I'm saying, like, conceptually taking his idea and expanding it. There are some definite upsides. So it's an interesting bit. It's not the main reason to buy the book. It's just him. I think that last part is just him sort of doing his bit to save the world, so to speak. Like, it's him trying to make the world a better place by giving his idea of what a better place would look like, I guess. It's his vision at the end. But everything else in there is solid gardening and business advice for starting a small scale market gardening. So even if you don't agree with any of this stuff at the end, I kind of do. But even if you don't, the rest of the book is solid and very useful. And even some of the ideas in his integrated farming system would still work out even if you weren't trying to do everything he's trying to do with it. So it's still a very useful book, even if you don't agree with the guy. And most of it is, agreement is inapplicable because there are only a few places where he sort of editorializes. Most of it's just solid information. So yeah, I liked it. I do not at all regret reading it. I only regret that I don't have land to implement it on yet. I've used some of the principles in here, though, when planning out the garden at my work, even though I'm limited there because it is more for demonstration purposes than just raw production, so I don't produce as much as I probably could be if we kind of nailed it down and focused on productive systems there. But this has resulted in us producing quite a bit more than it ever produced before, is using methods from this book and similar books. So yeah, I highly recommend it. I'd say go out and buy it. I would definitely recommend looking for it used, though, unless you absolutely need up-to-date references in the back, in which case I would look and see if they have a new updated version of it. But yeah, used, perfectly fine. I've really enjoyed this book. Anyway, that's all I've got for this week. I told you it was going to be a little bit of a short show. My shows will probably oscillate between about 20 minutes to an hour, depending upon what I'm doing. Interviews will be longer. Book reviews will be shorter. I may do more clustered book reviews. It just depends on how many books I can get through in whatever amount of time runs between book reviews. But yeah, definitely expect next year, starting next year, there's going to be a lot more organization to the show. I'm working on that now. Until then, though, I'm going to still try to keep the show going, keep it fun, informative, and hopefully useful for you guys. Definitely leave me some feedback if you have any questions or concerns or just interesting things you know about that you want to share with the world, and I will talk about it on the show maybe. So that's all I've got for today. Thank you guys. Have a great day and go out and enjoy your garden. Thank you so much for listening. That wraps it up for this week. You can follow everything we're doing over at tjsgarden.com, and the best advertising we can get is word of mouth. So please share this show around with your friends, directly or via social media. Have a great day, guys, and enjoy your garden.